The first step in understanding your text options in Flash is understanding the 3 different types of text elements. So let's take a moment for a brief overview. Let's start with static text. Static text is essentially a picture at runtime. That is, you create the text at authoring mode and it remains editable as text, but when published to Swift, the compiler creates a graphic from that text. As a result, the end user doesn't have to have the same font you used when you created the file, and there are no compatibility issues between platforms or any of those types of things. Static text is what you use when you don't want any kind of programming for the text and you just want to display headlines and body copy and so on and so forth. The next type of text is called dynamic text. Dynamic text is what you use when you want to exert ActionScript control over text. We'll look at the features available to us a little bit later on, and despite the fact that we're going to have a minimal attention spent to ActionScript in this course, we'll actually use dynamic text to produce a scrolling text field. Okay, so then the final text element is input text, and input text is similar to dynamic text, essentially the same really, except that it allows user input. So you would use input text when you want to get the user to type in a username or log in or a password or something along those lines. Typically, in both the cases of dynamic and input text, you need ActionScript to take advantage of these features. But as I said before, in a future chapter, we'll look at scrolling text as one example where you can use dynamic text elements to your advantage. In addition to those simple explanations, let's take a look at some of the properties that are available for each type of text. Let's again start with static text elements. And let's come down to the Properties Inspector, and again, we'll be looking at the appearance of the text in the next video, so let's focus on functionality for the moment. Down at the bottom of the Properties Inspector here is a URL link option that allows us to enter a URL around a selection of text in the static text element that will link to a website when functioning in a browser, or switch to a browser when running from a projector or other application. There's also one small bit of additional functionality available to static text, which is the ability to make the text selectable. Although you can't work with static text elements extensively with ActionScript, you can enable this feature to allow the user to select text and copy it into their clipboard. Okay, let's switch over to dynamic text elements, and now we have significant increase in functionality down here. The first is that we can apply an instance name. This is required for us to be able to target this particular element with ActionScript. We also now have the ability to change from single-line display to multi-line and multi-line without wrapping. We have the same selectability option, but we also have the ability to format the text using HTML, very simple rudimentary HTML tags, and the ability to add a border and background to the text element. And in addition to the formatting that was the same, we now have the chance to embed a font. This is necessary because since we have to program the text element and we don't know which characters will be displayed at any given time if we're exerting ActionScript control over this element, we need to be able to include the font to render a custom typeface. If you choose not to embed a font, you will rely on the end user having your font, the same font you used during authoring, and therefore if it's not there, you'll end up with a substitution. To embed a font, you simply click on the Embed button and choose which glyph or character to include in this text element. You could start with all glyphs, but that would dramatically increase your file size, or you can isolate specific characters to include. For example, if it were a headline, you might include only uppercase characters. Or if you were using typical body copy, you might use a combination of uppercase, lowercase, numerals, and punctuation, again holding Shift key down when you select. And you may also choose to autofill a character list from the text being used, particularly good for very short headlines and that type of thing, to make it so efficient that you're only using the exact characters in that particular field. If we do that now, you'll see that we get flash, CS3, E capital, E lowercase, and then NTI, TRG. In other words, we're not duplicating any letters. We're only including the letters required to reproduce this text. In any case, we can choose which characters to include in the file, and then when the characters are embedded, they will display properly on the end user's system. Okay, let's move on to input text. And as we said earlier, this is functionally equivalent to dynamic text with the exception of user input. So a new feature has been added, which is the ability to limit the maximum number of characters the user can type in. Here again, when the user is typing in, they will not be adding a URL, for example, so that functionality is not needed, but the ability to, say, limit a password field to 8 characters, for example, is desired. Finally, let's take a look at what it takes to add a URL to a static text element. First, we'll double-click to edit the element, then we'll select the text of interest, and finally we'll come down to the URL field and paste in our URL. We can also choose if we want to target a specific frame or window, including the standard blank, parent, self, and top. So we'll choose blank so it opens a new window when you click on this link. And that's all there is to it. Flash doesn't do anything beyond that. It doesn't maintain visited, active, or hover, or any kind of features for those link states unless you program them with ActionScript and style sheets. So you may also want to change the color of the text, which leads us to our next video, which is affecting the appearance of text elements. So let's take a quick look at what this looks like and then move on to the next video and get deeper into the subject.